Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Saath podcast, ASR's newest initiative where we talk about substance use disorders within the context of the Punjabi community.
Through inviting mental health experts, researchers, community members, and those with lived experiences, we discuss everything from the history of addiction to the lived realities of Punjabi families alongside providing relevant resources.
We are your hosts. I'm Ravia. I'm a community organizer and researcher from Edmonton.
I'm Manvinder, a social work PhD student from Winnipeg.
I'm Harleen, and I'm a medical student and anthropologist from Indiana.
I'm Harpreet. I'm a clinical researcher and an epidemiologist from Toronto. Thanks for joining us, and let's start the conversation.
Hi, welcome back to Saath. Today, me, Ravia, and Harpreet Jaswal will be your hosts, and I'll let Harpreet introduce our guest.
Awesome. So we have the pleasure of having Pinder here with us today. So Pinder is based in Calgary, Canada, and he has about 7 years of experience working as a recovery coach, a counselor, family support worker, whole bunch of different shoes that he fills. And we're really excited to chat with him today. So Pinder, welcome. So just to kind of start off that conversation, so before working as a counselor and a family support worker, can you give us an overview of like what brought you to this position, why you were interested in this work?
So what attracted me really to the work was just seeing over the years, just how pervasive, like with alcohol and things were in our community. And then where I work in particular, I work at the NAM Centre for Holistic Recovery in Calgary. We specifically target the Punjabi population. Close to probably half our patients are actually like South Asian, right? Punjabi or kind of near Punjab, somewhere near there. It's a problem that's I think fairly entrenched in our community. That's probably the main reason that attracted me to that. I think over the years, like my awareness around like not just the problems, let's say in Canada, but I'm originally from the UK, so over there. But actually, even more, even like in Punjab itself, in India, you kind of see all these videos of people sort of overdosing and these kinds of things. My visits to India over the years, I feel like that those scenes have gotten progressively worse. Maybe when I was younger, those things were a bit more outside of my awareness. But I went as a young adult, and I don't remember seeing quite so many sort of problems with addiction as I did like as I got older. So I think it's like a problem that's getting worse in our community. And in different forms, right? So the Punjab problem might be a little bit different to the problem, or the certain age group may be struggling with different things. But I feel like it's a problem in our community. And so the long answer to your question was it's something that's prevalent in our community. And very often it's something that's brushed under the carpet. Where some of that, it seems that sometimes the addiction thing does come to the surface, but often mental health stuff is very much like stigmatized, right? Like if you're feeling a bit depressed or something, well-meaning parents might say to you, well, what have you got to be depressed about, right? You live in Canada, or you've got all this these kinds of things are just not the discussions just don't really happen in our community. And so yeah, that would be the main reason. I think that's what kind of got me into it.
Goes right into the next question that we're asking. Speaking of those experiences you had personally, seeing things on trips to India, seeing things in the community in the UK, and now in Canada. So I think that's interesting that you're really speaking to like the diaspora problems too, but also the stuff that's happening in India. So that's like I think that's a theme that we've been able to develop through our conversations with, is that while the diaspora has similar problems, each of them, and they come up in similar ways because of the commonalities we share, but we're all different. I guess that's just a side note I wanted to bring up. But what does a day look like as working as a counselor for you at NAM?
A day is pretty good. It's pretty interesting. So we have an inpatient program, and we have an outpatient program. So the patients come in a day program. Yeah, we did run our patients through lots of different activities, different meetings, different like Punjabis will in the morning they do the Sukhmani Sahib Path, and like the English speakers they do a meeting. You can look at it as broadly speaking, we try to teach a lot of skills, a lot of stress management skills, right? We try to bring in a lot of spirituality and connection to self, connection to a higher power, and try to find ways to develop that connection. Um, and then we do some teaching. I usually do a fair amount of the teaching in a day. We do some Tai Chi in a day. So I get to do some Tai Chi at work, which is nice. Healing for addiction mental health is not just like single pronged, right? There's lots of different avenues that we work at for recovery. So like the mind, the body, the spirit, it's like multifaceted. And so we try our best to sort of incorporate as much of those things as we can. We also have a family program where we give some short activities for parents, so family members to do. It could be parents, it could be wife, it could be siblings. Recordings to listen to, prayers to read, that type of thing, that we found to be very helpful, helping clients and helping families overall.
So you mentioned that the Punjabi patients in the morning they do Sukhmani Sampat. So I'm just curious. So is the religious component is that intentional or was that requested by the population you're serving? So I know you spoke a little bit about spirituality. So I'm just curious about that aspect of the care and how that kind of like interplays with holistic care.
Yeah, so it's intentional. So AA, here at Alcoholics Anonymous, most commonly sort of referenced and used. Like, if you go to a physician, they'll probably, they may send you to some counselor, but they'll certainly recommend that you go to a meeting or something, right? And so, and it's about 100 years old. The first publication of AA came out about 100 years ago, and almost 100 years ago. And so they're very clear around the spiritual component of healing. And I think from my perspective, I can at least see, and maybe you guys have seen it too, but I've certainly seen people that have turned towards like religion and spirituality recover in their life, right? And so, gay worry, like people are sometimes struggling, like I'm Daya, and then they find a different path in life, right? And so from our perspective, right? So like you asked about like the Sukhmani Sahib particularly. Well, we have a large Sikh population, right? And so as a result, we tailor the programming. Everything that we do at NAM, we kind of tailor it towards the patient, right? And so as much as possible, right? So we have a patient that, let's say only speaks Urdu, right? We'll tailor our services as much as possible towards that patient that can only communicate in Urdu. So if we have some staff members that speak Urdu, then we'll try to like get that staff member to communicate more with the patient, but we can certainly translate a bunch of our documents into Urdu, right? So we have like, because we tend to the bulk of patients will be like English speaking or Punjabi speaking, everything that we develop in terms of like literature, programming, everything that we do, we're always working in like two streams. We're always doing like the Punjabi as well as the English speaking, right? And so all the folders, the documents, the journaling, the things that people do, we have it in Punjabi and we have it in English. Then in terms of like a higher power connection, like a spiritual component of recovery, like I said, AA is very specific. It doesn't say that you have to call God a certain name. It can be like God of your own choosing, God of your own, whatever word you want to use, right? But it's very difficult to do recovery if you don't lean on some additional power outside of yourself. And your world understanding can be however it might be. It could be something outside of yourself. It could be something deep inside yourself. It could be whatever but it's very difficult because then what happens is all that pressure of trying to recover and everything, it kind of falls on your shoulders then, right? And so if people that have been through a lot of stuff, because people don't come to like you don't come to a treatment center the first time you drink too much. A lot of stuff has happened in life, and through through the sort of the ups and downs of life and the slow sort of like unwinding of that, right? There's a lot of like hurt, a lot of pain, a lot of anger, a lot of guilt, a lot of shame. There's like a lot of like mixed things, and trying to like talk your way out of that, trying to think your way out of that, it's not that, it's a little bit more complicated than that. And so what we've learned at our clinic, and not just where I work, like this is, I think, more and more, if you were to probably look online, more and more, actually certainly addiction, by definition they also have like some element of mental health issues, right? Because it's not just like addiction is not simply that you just drink too much, right? It goes much deeper than that. There's a lot of pain, there's a lot of stuff that's built up, whether you know about it, whether you don't know about it. a lot of stuff exists for you to then, you know, get to the point where you're drinking so much to excess or using whatever you're using to kind of cope. People at that point when they reach our center, they're not drinking for fun anymore, right? They're drinking just to cope, right? And then on the other side, mental health, those that struggle with mental health, all human beings have ways of coping. You and I all have ways of coping. When things aren't going well, right? We all have ways. And if that way of coping just kind of starts escalating and getting out of control, then you can look at that, depending on your viewpoint, you could call that an addiction or you couldn't, whatever. But certain things that you do would will end up will have more detrimental impact on your life, right? Like let's say I get really stressed out. I come home, I eat like a whole bag of chips, right? Like it's not gonna be great for me, right? But I'm using obviously like I don't need to eat a whole bag of chips because they taste good, right? After a certain point, I'm eating them because they're filling some type of void or they're causing me to like bring my tension down or distract or whatever it might be away from whatever I'm struggling with, right? But the other person that kind of like comes home and drinks a whole bottle of liquor or something, well, they're gonna have other problems. But they're both just coping, right? They're both just ways of coping with whatever is going kind of on. So addiction, mental health, they both can benefit from that sort of spiritual, let's say, increase in that sort of spiritual connectivity, I would say. And for Sikhs, like it's very clear, right? Prayers are kind of laid out for us, right? Read this, do this. It's not as complicated. Whereas I'm not an expert on other religions or other cultures, but it might not be so kind of like straightforward, right? So they might have different prayers for different things. The reason that we do the Sukhmi Sahib each day is that we have patients that come in and stay with us for 6 weeks, right? So the clients are with us for 6 weeks. And so we try to really build a strong foundation, knowing we know, right? After 6 weeks, and they're not necessarily going to be doing Sukhmi Sahib every single day, right? They're going to be going back into life, doing whatever they're going to be doing, and that's fine. But the idea is that we try to sort of instill in them that they have to have some type of practice, some type of daily routine that will help keep some of that stress at bay, because addiction is like a stress induced defect of the brain, right? So stress makes everything worse, right? And stress comes in lots of different forms. Stress, like unresolved stuff from your past. You might think it's in the past, but it's causing you stress today, right? Because, things happen in your day, whether you realize it or not, it reminds you of that stuff that you've kind of got buried in the mind, right? And so it amps up your stress, right? And so we want to give people lots of different tools. And this is all our patients, right? We try to give as many tools as possible to help them. How can they use tools for themselves to bring down their stress, as opposed to, "Oh, I feel stressed out, let me go see somebody," right? Our goal is to sort of instill tools and teachings and practices that they can use themselves, because that's more efficient.
So I have two questions actually. So two things you mentioned. So you mentioned that a lot of your stresses are related to something much deeper. So things that could have occurred in your past that are kind of manifesting today, and maybe ways that are more implicit, but they are still having direct effects on you. So you did speak about adverse childhood experiences when we first met you, and you talked about scoring and how that relates to addiction and treatment. So I actually really wanted to know a bit more about that. So that's my first question. And then secondly, you talked about how, after a certain point, you have to kind of give to some other power other than yourself to kind of help resolve maybe problems you're having with addictions. So I was hoping you could speak to something you said before about how addiction is a family disease. So a twofold question.
Okay, so adverse childhood experiences was a big study actually that was done out like in the, I think, late 90s or the very early 2000s. right? They measured adverse childhood events, and they asked questions like, did you have enough to eat? Were people there to kind of take care of you? Did your parents go through any kind of difficulty in their relationships? Was there somebody who was struggling with mental illness at home? Was there somebody kind of using drugs and alcohol, things like that at home? Physically kind of harmed at home, verbally, right? Those are the kinds of questions that they ask in that. And there's like around 10 different questions. So they're looking at essentially things at home that occur that are suboptimal. Some of them more obvious, like physical abuse, sexual abuse, verbal abuse, some things like that. But then some of these other things that might not be as commonly known, right? So it captures like 10 different questions, and you're welcome to kind of look that up. But essentially what they're looking at is sort of adversity in childhood, right? And what really shocked me from that one was just the outcomes, because what they did, they followed the people that had these kind of adverse outcomes, and they looked at the outcomes in terms of like their overall health and their mental health. Like really astounding things are if you had like 4 or more of these adverse childhood kind of events, you have like a 70%, it's associated with 70% of the leading causes of death. So things like heart disease, cancer, all of these things are increased, right? Your chances of addiction, right? Four or more, if you have 4 or more of these adverse childhood events, right? You have a 7 times higher likelihood of alcoholism, 7 to 10 times more likely to use illegal drugs, right? They did this like kind of scoring thing where each out of the 10 ACE scores, even each one that you have gives you a 2 to 4 times greater probability that you'll use drugs or alcohol at a younger age. So all of these different things, like childhood adversity has negative implications as an adult, whether it's from a mental health perspective, whether it's from an addiction perspective, or whether it's from an overall health perspective. And now the exact sort of mechanisms of that, right? Like that is probably up for discussion, but and this is just me sort of speculating here, right? That yes, there's like because there's probably an epigenetic perspective to that, right? Like where your kind of your genetics kind of change as a result of the traumatic experiences, right? But then obviously if you have a lot of traumatic experiences in life, chances are your stress hormones are kind of higher, right? Your cortisol, your adrenaline, all of these different things. So the adverse childhoods, what they really showed was adversity in childhood leads to some suboptimal outcomes or difficulty in your health, whether it's physical or mental, as an adult, right?
And so I've also heard about adverse childhood experiences because I did my undergrad in psych. And I remember one time in our abnormal psych class, they had done a whole lecture on it, and then they started talking about suicidality in babies, and how babies who have adverse childhood experiences, like they will like inconsolably cry and they won't want to be picked up, and it's like this whole thing, and they'll stop eating. I remember this was like a very traumatic class that we had, so it's interesting to hear you talk about adverse childhood experiences. So that study was done in the 90s. So are there more recent studies that you refer to when you integrate this concept into your practice?
I think that, well, I mean, in terms of adverse childhood, there is other follow-up studies, but that's the main one. That's like the seminal kind of study on that, because it was such a large population they used to kind of get to gather those results. Now we're adults, we think differently, right? And you learn differently as adult, right? Like children, they learn just through modeling. They watch you. They, children like they just like they pick up things. You don't even know where they pick them up from. They form sort of understandings about life, and you're not really even sure sometimes where that even came from. And so at a young age, the subconscious, right, the part of the mind that's the kind of like outside of our awareness, is very active. Kids are not learning in the way that you and I are learning. Like, you want to learn something today, you're going to open up a book, you're going to read about the topic, you're going to maybe watch a lecture or go attend a class or something, right? Children aren't learning that way. They're learning almost like absorbing things around them in a very sort of haphazard way, right? They're not learning in a very linear way, right? The brain activity in their brain is a little different to the brain activity in our brain as adults. And so they pick up everything, they see everything, but they don't always necessarily integrate it in the correct way. So a good example that we always give is that two parents are arguing, right? So, you see two adults arguing today as adults, you're going to be like, oh, they must have some stuff going on, right? Like, because adults have issues. Of course, adults argue. It's a pretty normal thing, right? But a child, they think that the adult is arguing because of them, right? Because they're very like egocentric. They're very, because a child, if you look at the child, they think that like everything happens because of them, right? It's just the way, the nature of the mind, right? But that's an error, right? That is an error that happens. But that sometimes, if that happens enough, then that those kind of sort of subconscious patterns, beliefs start to develop, right? And then they cause you problems later on in life.
This is also relevant, and I think, Binder, you're actually the first guest I think that's fully delved into the adverse childhood experiences side of this. So this is really, really helpful, I think, for our listeners. But I also was thinking of the way you said how children kind of move through life and haphazardly are picking up things. And I think now I'm thinking about the process of like addiction recovery and like harm reduction recovery and mental health. It's almost like you have to enter that space like, and I know the work that you're doing at Nam Recovery is not haphazard, but it's coming at a person from different angles. So you have the spiritual angle, the mental, you said you were doing Tai Chi, there's a physical angle. So there's almost a way of going back to that, I don't know, going back to that childhood self and learning through doing, doing bhat in the morning, praying in the morning, other things. So I just wanted to reflect on that a bit because I think that was a really interesting connection that I made from your comment. So I think Harpreet has another question, but I'll pass it over to y'all.
No, literally just me and Robbie are reflecting on life right now. Yeah, so just kind of going back to just the whole addiction as a family disease. So in your work, what are some patterns you see in families affected by substance use? And also, if you could communicate one message to families currently dealing with addiction in like silence or shame, what would you want them to hear as a practitioner in this field?
Families are very hopeless, right? They've often like tried lots of things. Like I said, people don't reach out for help very early, and even patients, right? Patients don't reach out right away. A patient often has the awareness that, yeah, they may be drinking too much or this is not good for them. They try to stop themselves, they try to cut down by themselves. They've tried lots of different things before they reach for help. Families are often, they've tried a lot, right? And so they're sometimes quite resentful, right? They've lost a lot of hope, so they're kind of hopeless. They don't think this person's going to change. Patients, right? What we know is that the families and the patients are often quite connected, right? So going back to, I mentioned earlier, like the subconscious, right? So as a child, your subconscious mind is very active. Like if you go to the same workplace every day, you can kind of get to work half like driving, half thinking about something else, kind of on the phone. You're not really focused, but you can get there. You're not gonna get lost because you've done that route so many times. But the first time you go somewhere, you probably need the map. It's like it's you have to be very focused, right? And so the repetition sinks things way deeper into the mind. And so we just have families repeat small things, really, really uh, things that are very doable, right? But what we've noticed in our center, and this is something that Dr. Gill developed, right? The physician I worked with. And what he noticed is that just doing these kind of small activities had a really massive impact on the outcomes of patients, right? Because patients have to go back, they usually go back to their families, right? And not always, but mostly. And if there's a lot of like stuff built up, just because the patient has done their work doesn't mean that that stuff is still not there when they go back home, right? And so we have families work on stuff so that that just increases the readiness of like a reunification, increases the readiness of what happens when they kind of go back home. Yeah. And some of and then there's just other interesting things that we just sometimes, even if a patient isn't ready, it's like it's for them, right? It's for the family. And so families can start doing some stuff, and you might find that has that can kind of like push a patient towards seeking treatment, right? So we can always optimize. That's how we look at it from our perspective, that it's inefficient to just treat the patient or the client. It's more efficient to treat the client plus the family members. But like I said, family members they've often lost a lot of hope. And so we at our clinic, we've developed sort of short and sweet things that they can do, that can that we feel that can be quite helpful.
That's really important to speak about because that's kind of what Astra is like a starting point for talking about alcohol. And actually, during COVID, we had a few peer support groups where we spoke with, like, usually it was children of parents who experienced, often fathers who experienced substance use disorder, and just like supporting each other through that. So the family definitely, like when you say it's a family disease, we definitely have witnessed how um, it impacts like the children, the parents, the family, all across. And I think this is just a question I have just from our conversations. And I know NAM is partly a spiritually based program and a mental health program, but I'm just wondering if one of our listeners is looking into doing this program, but maybe they're unsure about like their own spirituality or how they would approach that. How does the clinic work within those bounds? Like if they're not, the spirituality isn't speaking to them, let's say, is that something that ever has happened out of curiosity?
Yeah, yeah, it happens. Yeah, and we work with them with that. So that we have like surveys and things that we do. We have questionnaires. We have a pretty robust intake process, and so then we work with them on all of that. Yeah, like everyone has usually something, right? It doesn't have to be the word God or Waheguru or Jesus or something. It can be there's ways that we use to kind of help people find something that they can kind of lean on. It might be universe, it might be nature, it might be the ocean, it might be the stars, it might be there's different things and we have like a whole system that we use to kind of help people find something to kind of use, just to plug into some of the affirmations and intention setting and things that we do. So there we have a process for that.
And I guess following up on that, like, how does your work, and we did kind of talk about this, but how does your work differ by population? So, kind of touching on what are your experiences working with Punjabis navigating substance abuse, but also speaking in the Alberta context of working in Calgary and what that looks like for you?
Well, I've only ever worked in Calgary, right? So I can't really compare the other areas for you. But uh, people are not that different, right? People are unique in that we have unique experiences, but you work in this kind of area long enough, you just see themes, right? Themes of things that lead to this type of thing, right? So then people are not that different, whether you're from an English sort of background, whether you're from Punjabi background, whether you're from, Africa, South America, wherever you might be from. Um, it it there's a Gabor Mate. He's a retired addiction physician out of Vancouver. He would say that you shouldn't really. The question is not like why the addiction. The question is like why the pain, right? So like people are in pain, people are struggling. People often don't. People are confused, right? People just don't know. Like that I don't know what happened. I thought I was doing good, and then all of a sudden and 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 so like I said, a lot of this ties back to those young ages, 0 to 4, 0 to 11, right, where the subconscious was like very active. Lots of sort of negative self beliefs get put into the mind, right, at that young age, and then they just get reinforced over life, right. That sort of pain is what often drives the addiction mental health stuff. And so from from our perspective, it's just about sort of like helping clients shine a light on some of these things. It's about helping clients work through some of these things, bring them up into awareness, forgive, right? Whatever needs to kind of be forgiven. And those are kind of heal resentments, right? We often carry a lot of resentment, the kind of the unsaid stuff. Like something happened before, then we're like, okay, you know what? It's in the past. Let's just forget about it, thinking that the time just kind of heals that thing, but that's not always the case, right? So, uh, and just giving tools, right? So you start doing these kinds of things, like I said, like that kind of multi-pronged approach. You start doing some stuff, even if you're, I would say to like anybody, that even if you're not specifically struggling with addiction, mental health issues, right? Doing the kinds of things that where you're connecting to yourself, right? You're meditating, you're praying, you're journaling, whatever it might be, connecting to other people, like healthy individuals in your life, right? It's more important, yes, if you're struggling with addiction, it's very important to have like some type of support group, right? Because as much as your family and your friends, they try to support you, right? They don't quite understand what it means. If a person with addiction says like I'm having a craving, while somebody who has gone through that, walked that path, they understand what a craving means. You might just be like, oh, I'm really craving cake. That just means you really want cake, right? That doesn't mean that there's going to be a burying, like deep, deep obsession all day, and all you're going to ever think about is cake. The whole day you're trying to work, you're trying to spend time with your kids, trying to spend time with your family, and it's just like cake, 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 cake. We don't mean someone who hasn't walked that path might not understand that, right? A well-meaning person, like a family member, might be like, "Oh, well, I just really feel like drinking." They'll be like, "Well, just have like 2 drinks. Don't have more than that." Right? Trying to support them, but they just don't understand. So it's really important for someone who's addicted to get that support, right? To have some type of community of like-minded. But it's actually really important for all of us as just from a preventative perspective. If you want to stay mentally sort of healthy, connecting to yourself regularly, like I said, like through journaling, whatever it might be, meditation, right? Connecting to other healthy people regularly is very helpful. Connecting to your higher power, connecting to whether that's through prayer or whatever it might be, right? These kinds of things are really important. And then doing it regularly, right? So these are broadly speaking things that we sort of teach clients, right? And facilitate some of that healing for them. They can heal, right? Only they can do the work. We just try to facilitate it. But I would say from my personal perspective, these are things that really help me, right? And I didn't necessarily go into the work thinking I had some type of like addiction mental health problem, right? But I would say it's those kinds of the tools that we're talking about, they've had a massive impact on my life personally. So I think they're just good for everyone as just to keep yourself mentally healthy.
I guess just my last question, I know Harpreet has a little bit of an ending she'll do, is working in Alberta, how does Alberta Health Services support the work you do in Calgary?
Yeah, so the services are covered by Alberta Health Services, right? So it's like going to like just like how you would go to a regular medical clinic, right? And so the only fees that a patient pays are just like kind of like admin fees, right? So if you're staying in our inpatient treatment, there's a deposit you pay. There's a fee you pay for like your binder and to get the it's like a journal type of thing. So there's certain like admin fees, but it's not that much. But the actual sort of the treatment and then the care and the all of that's covered by Alberta Health Services and Recovery Alberta.
This has been a really great conversation. I feel like we touched on a lot of different topics. And again, I think that speaks to the fact that your work is so holistic. So I'm glad we're able to talk about a variety of things that are all related to addiction and substance use. So I always like to end off the episode asking if you have any final thoughts or reflections, just to kind of like wrap up everything that we chatted about. If there's anything else that you wanted to touch on that we didn't ask you about.
I would say that like I think the good thing I'm seeing over my life, I guess, is that the stigma around addiction mental health is slowly being removed, right? But probably not fast enough. And so yeah, I would just like if someone's struggling, just there are lots of places available, not just where I work. There's lots of stuff online, there's lots of centers. I would just encourage people to kind of reach out, whether it's a family member, whether it's a patient. There is lots of help out there. So you just got to kind of find it really.
Absolutely. I also wanted to reflect, by the time this episode comes out, we would have talked to someone from Roshni Clinic in Surrey and medical clinic in Edmonton and now Nam Recovery in Calgary. So there's definitely a lot of Punjabi-centered supports in Western Canada is where we're living right now. So there's definitely a relevance to the work we do, and there's lots of stuff out there.
So Pinder, thank you so much for chatting with us today. Again, to Ravia's point, you shared a lot of different perspectives that we hadn't chatted about before on this podcast. So thank you so much.
You're welcome, guys. Take care.
Thank you for joining Saath, the Asra podcast. If you have enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe or follow our social media at asra.now so you never miss an episode.
We would love to know what you think about today's episode. Please leave us a comment or send us a direct message. If you have any suggestions for future podcast guests, please fill out the Google form on our website or in the episode description. If you'd like additional information or resources in Punjabi or in English, please visit the ASRA website at www.asranow.ca. Thank you.